Welcome to the Making of Me podcast. And today we are joined by Dr. Danny Brassell, known as Jim Curry with PhD, a global speaker, coach, author of 21 books, and co-founders of Well Crafted Stories. Danny transformed personal stories into powerful business narrative, helping entrepreneurs turn stages into client generating machine. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show, Danny.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Aro Benaiah, and more importantly, thanks for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danny. So, Danny, what are some of the challenges that actually shape you into who you are today?
Well, if I was going to write an autobiography, Aro Benaiah, it'd probably be called Pivots because I feel like I've already lived 9 lives. 30 years ago, I was a journalist covering President Bush in the 1992 presidential election. I loved my job. I got to meet every editor of every major daily. One editor offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. Meanwhile, a friend told me they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became an educator for the noblest of reasons, Arbonaya, for the high pay, and I actually fell in love with teaching. I've taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. I can make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. And in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything financially. And I could give you the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I learned a lot from that experience. First of all, I learned that my wife is my soulmate. I put her through the ringer and she stood right by me. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, I learned that money's not everything because you can lose money just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would say, well, you deserve that. But now I realize unless you know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess. It took a catastrophe. But the more I read the Bible, I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year. And so I started speaking on the side and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Arbaniah, he gave me a much higher number. And I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns, I was able to build up a highly lucrative speaking business. Really attracted the attention of some pretty famous people and companies who wanted me to coach them. And I have to confess, Arvin, I really resisted coaching for a long time because you need to know this about me. I'm obsessive compulsive. I will not let you be on your back, holding you accountable until you succeed. And I
Yeah.
work primarily with entrepreneurs and executives and business leaders. I find that they're highly motivated. They do the work, and it's probably been the most gratifying work of my life. So we can go down whichever path you choose, my friend.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you, Danny. So, Danny, you have delivered over uh 3,500 keynotes. What is your framework for creating a presentation that engage and convert audience into clients?
Great. So when I work with a client, Abinaya, we go through, you have to forgive me, I'm a former teacher, so everything I do
Yeah,
either rhymes or alliterative. And so I call it the 5 C's process. First of all, we get clarity by asking ourselves, who is your audience and what is the problem that you solve?
yeah,
Once we're able to answer those questions, then we go into the other 4 C's, which are connecting with your audience, teaching engaging content that serves your audience, having one clear call to action, and finally ending with an emotional close that gets audiences to rise and run after you to work with you immediately.
wow, amazing, amazing. Thanks for sharing clarity, connection, call to action, close, and yeah, that's really amazing. So, in your book, leadership begins with motivation and misfits and crackpot. You use our Paul Harvey style storytelling. Can you share an example on how this approach transform a business message?
Yeah, well, when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher in the school that none of my students were ever tardy to class. And it's because I always started off class with a Paul Harvey story. Now, Paul Harvey, when I was growing up, was a guy on the radio who'd come on the radio every day at 12:15 and say, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And for 5 minutes, he's telling you a story about a person or a company, and you're trying to guess who it is. And my students loved those stories, but the problem was a lot of those stories were about like Fred Astaire and Sears Roebuck. Well, kids today don't even know who those
Yeah.
people are. And so I wrote the book Leadership Begins with Motivation as an
Ooh.
homage to Harvey, but with updated people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Well, then after I wrote the book, I read it and I'm like, huh, that's interesting. Completely unintentionally, a lot of my stories were of white male Americans. And so I wrote the book Misfits and Crackpots, and most of the
Ooh.
stories in this book, women, minorities, and international people, because I think people need to hear stories about people all over the place from different backgrounds. The relationship between reading and leading is very clear to me. While a lot of readers don't necessarily become effective leaders, I have never, ever read about or met a single effective leader that's not also an avid reader.
Yeah, yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Danny. So, Danny, why you were making reference of some of those particular occasions that shape you into who you are today? You talk about bankruptcy as a result of real estate. Can you actually more like share a bit of that story for us?
Well, I actually think all of us need to embrace adversity, Aro Benaiah. I was
Yeah.
speaking in India to a school, and at the end of the presentation, all the kids came up and were saying all kinds of nice things to me. And then I saw a little boy looking up at me, and he had tears in his eyes, and he was about 6 years old, and I noticed he was missing his left arm. And he looked up at me and
Mm.
he said, well, how can I succeed? And so I got down to his eye level and I said, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old.
Ooh.
Everybody used stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I went to a school where a teacher worked one on one with me and she would sing things to me and I found I could sing them back without my stutter. And gradually I lost my stutter and I became a swan, kind of like the movie The King's Speech. But I
Yeah.
looked at that little boy in the eyes and I said, isn't it interesting that the little boy people used to make fun of because he couldn't talk right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the world. What? And he gets this big grin on his face. He's like, speak. I'm like, never let anybody tell you what you cannot do. Everything is
Mm.
possible. So I can't tell you of a single successful person I've ever read about who didn't have to overcome some adversity. And so it's just part of life. You know, you can either stay down or you can get back up. I chose to get back up.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. So, Danny, you highlight a connection between reading, mastery, and public speaking. How do these skills amplify each other's, and how can our audience apply this?
Yeah. So again, um, I've never ever read about an effective leader that wasn't also an avid
Yeah.
reader. I mean, it doesn't matter what the industry. If you look in business, Elon Musk, richest person in the
Yeah.
world, he still reads a book a day. Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people on the planet, still reads morning to night. If you look in the military, General Schwarzkopf, an American general, they say he could read in four languages and quote Shakespeare voraciously. If you look at world leaders, Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison for 27 years on Robben Island, he used that time to read and to really reflect and get better. You look at some of the world's top athletes, they're avid readers. I was just reading an article about the football player David Beckham and how much he reads to improve himself. You look at entertainment, obviously, actors and actresses are always reading scripts. So, in order to really take yourself to the next level, you need to be reading. And I love to read just because, as a storyteller, I'm always looking for new stories to tell. And that's where I find a lot of the gold mines are in the books that I read.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. So tell us about your successful client generation system. What is one practical strategy listener can implement right away?
Yeah, so one of the first things I ask my clients to do, and you can do this as well, Arlen, I, is later on, I want you to sit down in a comfortable chair with a pen and paper and a libation of choice. And for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened to you. And I don't mean the entire story, I just mean triggers, like the
Mm.
time I locked myself out of the car in front of the grocery store, the time dad spilt mustard on his tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can come up with hundreds of stories like that. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, well, what's this story really about? Well, this is a story about overcoming adversity. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. This is a story about making priorities in my life. On my computer, I have hundreds of files with literally tens of thousands of stories. So when I'm putting together a presentation and I want my audience to feel a certain emotion, I have a story to meet that emotion. I'll give you an example. I was working with a woman, and by the way, whenever I talk about my clients, I don't tell you their names because I believe in discretion. My my business partner, Coach Jimmy, he loves to name drop everybody we work with, but I believe in a little bit of discretion. So we're working with this nutritionist, Dr. Kathy, and she was ending her presentation with her call to action, which she has a program that helps women with their digestive issues. It's a 90-day program for 1997, and I said, well, you can't end on a call to action. You're ignoring the emotions of the audience. And she's like, well, what can I do about that? I'm like, well, what do you want your audience to understand? She said, eventually, she said, I want them to understand they can't do it on their own. Oh, you need to hire an expert story. And she's like, what's that? I'm like, I'll give you an example. I'll leave you all with this. Many years ago, my wife and I had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines, driving to the theater when we got a flat tire. And my wife said, well, I'll call AAA. I'll get the tow truck. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I got out of the car and I opened up the trunk and I got out the spare tire and I got the pumper thing and I got the big jack thing and I started trying to take out the nuts from the tire. And basically, 27 minutes later, I have grease all over my hands. I haven't fixed the flat tire. I look up. My wife has her arms crossed. She's shaking her head, looking at me like I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had called AAA 27 minutes earlier, and this tow truck shows up. And this 17-year-old punk hops out of the tow truck and proceeds to fix my flat tire in 3 minutes. You
Ooh,
know, I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do it on our own, but if you want to
yeah,
save time, save money, and you want to save a whole lot of headache and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so what I've done there, Aro Benaiah, is I've taken a story to use as a metaphor to remind the audience, I've tried lots of diets before, but maybe I should try Dr. Kathy because she's going to guide me along and she knows what's the right thing to do. That's the power of storytelling. That's the difference between a good storyteller and a great storyteller. Great speeches entertain. The best speeches, though, they entertain with stories that actually have intention.
yeah, amazing. They actually entertain with stories that have intention. So with 100 plus our speaking engagements annually, how do you keep your content fresh while maintaining consistency in your message?
Every audience is different. I don't completely change my talks, but I definitely adjust my presentations based on my audiences. I like to use a lot of humor, so I'll try different jokes with different
Yeah,
audiences. So we'll say if I do a joke in Nigeria and nobody laughs, I'm like, is it the joke or is it Nigeria? And then I do the joke in Switzerland and nobody laughs. I wonder if it's the joke. Then I do it in Texas and nobody laughs. I'm like, okay, it's the joke. I need to change the joke. So I'm always, sometimes something works better with a male audience than with a female audience or with
yeah,
younger people versus older people. And so I'm constantly interested in engaging the audience based on different demographics.
yeah, amazing. So for entrepreneurs struggling to leverage our speaking engagements, what common mistake do you see and how can they avoid them?
Well, the biggest mistake I see most people make in their presentations is they have multiple calls to action. So, for example, I was on a podcast the other day, and at the end of the podcast, the interviewer, she said, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. And after we got off the air, I looked at her and I said, you just asked your audience to do 3 different things.
Good.
They're not do any of them. So again, I'm a former teacher. Everything rhymes. So I always say choices confuse and cause you to lose. You need one
Mm,
clear action. Know exactly what you want your audience to do, and you're going to increase the number of people that will do that. You don't want your audience to think too hard during your presentation.
yeah, choices confuse cause you to lose. Yeah, amazing, amazing. Thank you. So how can listen and develop deeper learning habits that foils not just speaking success, but business growth overall?
Well, again, I believe that speaking is the fastest way to grow your business. And the strategies that I have 2 business partners, Coach Jimmy and Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer because my background is academia. Coach Jimmy was a Broadway actor, and Dave is an attorney. And it's very important to understand that presentations are the fastest way to grow your business. And the things that we teach our clients will work whether you're speaking to 1,000 people or one person one-on-one. It can work on a virtual podcast or it can work in a live setting. But these are strategies that work. And sometimes it's just a matter of the people we work with. They have the right story, but they put it in the wrong portion of their presentation. A big mistake I see a lot of people make is they brag all the time throughout their talk about how great they are. And I always say, stop sharing your successes, start sharing your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you share your failures, the more your audience is going to see themselves. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do with the audience is to connect with them. I always, again, former teacher, in the first 5 minutes of your talk, when you're connecting with your audience, you have to rap. Rap stands for relatability, authority, and purpose. You have to show you're relatable to your audience. You have to demonstrate your authority, and finally, you have to share your purpose. So relatable. I am just like you. I've had that exact same problem. Authority, and I solved that problem. Purpose. And now I'm on a mission to help people just like you so you don't have to suffer the way I suffered. If you can do that in the beginning, you're going to really connect much better with your audience.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Danny. So, Danny, for my audience who want to connect with you, who want to reach out to you, and who want to get your book,
Well,
where
as
is the
a
best
thank you,
platform to do this?
yeah. As a thank you to you, Aro Benaiah, and your audience for having to listen to me, I wanted to give everybody some freebies. If you go to
Oh,
freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own complimentary, well-crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual process that Coach Jimmy and I take our clients through to help you create your well-crafted story. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork out of where should I put this story and why am I putting it here? And what this means for you is you now have a system to turn your audiences into actual clients. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And again, Arab and I'm just so grateful that you had me on your podcast, and you should be very proud. You're cranking these out left and right, and it's better than a university education.
yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Danny. I really appreciate it. It's really an honor having you on the show, and thank you for the whole lot of insight you just shared during the course of this conversation. Yeah, your highlight actually reminds us that storytelling isn't just about sharing experience. It's about creating connection, impacts, and opportunity. For my audience, you can actually grab his free story blueprints at our freestoryguide.com and start transforming your business story today. Once again, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show, Danny.
Thank you, Arab and
Yeah,
God bless.
thank you.